Today on Untold Facts, we'll explore the harm that irresponsible reporting causes the LGBT plus community and discuss the documentation and positive representation of LGBT plus stories in the media. My name is Kiki Mordi. The media plays an important role in LGBT plus advocacy, and I have two amazing media people here to have this conversation with. I have SI Ohumu and Edwin Okolo. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Glad to be here.
So Edwin is a journalist, a storyteller, a writer, and your works are in the intersections of gender identity, feminism, social justice, and cultural evolution. And of course, we have SI Ohumu, who is a producer. She was part of the team that worked on the Emmy-nominated documentary Sex for Great. She's also a social enterprise founder, Ubini, which is a safe community in Benin City that explores art and the environment. Thank you so much for coming here today.
You're welcome.
So the first important question is, I think it's a yes or no answer. I think we already know the answer, but how important would you say the media is to advocacy for LGBT+?
Very important. Perhaps the most important.
It is actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially in a country like Nigeria where a lot of people are socialized
Okay.
via media, radio, television.
Mm.
The images that we put out
Yes.
are very important.
And then we have some of those stereotypes for people who grew up in Nigeria and consumed Nigerian media. There is some stereotypes about the community that we've learned from the media. Can you share some of those?
I think the most important stereotype that exists in Nigerian media as a whole, entertainment and journalism, is the complete erasure of LGBT people. There's maybe in 100 films, you'll see one or two portrayals, and they never actually call it what it is. Yeah. They find euphemisms, they find ways to mock or experiences of these people, and they essentially use them as the butt of jokes or as the punchline or as the thing that needs to be purged to find resolution in films and journalism. And so those stereotypes have really, really helped to create this impression that LGBT people don't exist and that they don't live normal lives, and that whenever they exist in a community, they exist as the jester or the person that needs to be purged for the community to find itself.
And then there is also global stereotypes that sort of, help with the criminalization of homosexuality across the world. Some people would say that there is pedophilia linked to, homosexuality. Then there is also the HIV stereotype as well. I think there's still some people that don't believe that you can get HIV from heterosexual sex.
Yes.
So, can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Or I think there is the dead gay trope, where if you're in a series of film, then you have to die. And I'd really like to come back to Nigeria and just add to what Edwin said. When they do represent us in the film or in media or in journalism, it's always a malady and it's always linked to some villain. So this guy is a bad person, but he's also gay. Or when it's lesbians, then there is just the added sprinkling of misogyny. You don't see anybody who's genderqueer or asexual. That one doesn't even exist in their books. I think the meanest one, though, is the erasure, like Edwin said. We don't exist.
And what does this mean, for real life people who live, as part of the LGBT community?
If you think back to your childhood in a Nigerian home, you remember watching dramas, home videos with your parents. So imagine if you're a person who is gay or bisexual, and you have been conditioned and socialized to see people who you identify with as bad or non-existent at all. That shapes your identity completely. And then we have to understand that the society is made up of individuals. So if we have people like this who already think about us like this, they go out and they become journalists, really. They become presidents. They get into positions of power and they take that with them. So the media shapes culture, and culture shapes governance and business, and which is why we're illegal now in Nigeria.
I mean, you're a journalist, Edwin, and you've written essays surrounding LGBT plus stories. You've documented their lived experiences. You did one on a Nigerian transgender woman. You want to talk to us about that?
So I have actually written 2 essays about Bobrisky. The first one I wrote in 2017 for the Native Mag, and the second one I wrote in 2020 for Why Niger's non-binary series, which was a series that essentially gave a platform to LGBT people and LGBT allies to speak on LGBT matters in Nigeria. I felt it was important to do an update because when I wrote the original essay in 2017, Bobrisky hadn't officially come out as trans. And then we were unsure of her gender, and I felt it was important to update the information out there because I feel as a journalist, it's your imperative that if you put out information that is inaccurate or incomplete, when more information is available to you, it is your responsibility to ensure that that information is put out there and that it's giving context. And I felt Bobrisky is one of the few LGBT people who are visible in Nigeria, who have taken ownership of their own narrative, and it was important to place her in the canon of people who have essentially changed how Nigerians, actually forced Nigerians to examine their bigotry, to examine all the misconceptions and stereotypes they have around trans people, and the fact that she exists and continues to exist and continues to challenge people's worldviews has created space for other trans women to actually come forward and start to live their lives. I think there's a whole coalition of trans women in Abuja who are entering into pageants. There's a small coalition in Port Harcourt as well. And these people are able to live these public lives because Bobrisky has created a blueprint. It's not the blueprint we wanted. It's not the blueprint we felt was respectable or acceptable. But that's the point. The point is that she is telling people that there is no blueprint. Like, if you live publicly, if this is how you want to choose to express yourself, there is space for you. And I felt it was important to have an essay that essentially tracks this and essentially challenges the bigotry and the transphobia that has existed around her, because there are a lot of women who refuse to call her by her given pronouns. And it's such a small thing. So I felt it was important to essentially shame these people and essentially place Bobrisky in the canon and acknowledge the work that she does. She, of course, is extremely problematic, but that doesn't invalidate the work that she does. People can be extremely problematic and still contribute to the cause. We cannot expect one person to do the entire work, which is why, as a journalist, my job is to document. Bobrisky's job is to live publicly.
Yes.
Other people might choose activism. Everybody has their part to play, and every part is valuable, and every part advances the cause. So,
thank you so much. Definitely. I mean, so there's also this talk about how, I mean, he has done this. He has represented Bobrisky in the right light that she would definitely love. How about when the media does it in the wrong light? Like, are there any examples that really, are there any bad examples that really make you question journalism?
Yes, I think there are. And it's a pattern, really. It's a thing where we, and every time I say we here, I mean people who identify as LGBT+. It's a thing where we are offered for the comments and for the quotes and for the responses that these media houses know that we will get. So, for example, when you had the situation with the police illegally arresting gay men, right? So these stories are written without context, and they are written in a way that fuels the conditioned hate in Nigerians. A very recent example is, I don't know if you can call this journalism anyway, but Linda Ikeji, right? Posting about what's her name?
Temi Owasa.
Okay. I tried to merge both names together. Posting about Temi being present at a gay event without why have you done that? Because you know that there will be Nigerians in the comments saying, "Oh, she's gay," or you know, without. Do you understand what I mean? So we are used as fodder. We are content basically, and they know that these things, they matter because your life is literally in danger. So it is the journalists in Nigeria, and I think I can say in Africa really. And the reason why I say this is because that video of the journalist saying, "Why are you gay?" comes to mind, right? They take us and implant us in these stories, and they wait for the remarks to come, they foil it, and they don't care if as a result you lose your livelihood, if as a result, like in the case with the police, for example, right? You are misrepresented. If as a result you are killed, beaten, they do not care. As far as they've gotten their good analytics, then it's fine. And it's really harmful.
I mean, you're right. It's truly harmful when people out, community members, LGBT plus community members on social media without their permission. It puts a target on their backs. But then there are media houses who claim that they're not taking any side in quotes, and they just really want to report the stories. But they also do these harmful things. So what are some of the other things that are not intentional in quotes? How can the media do better in representing the LGBT plus community? How can they be more intentional about it?
By first of all, not taking us as a niche, as a little box to check and say, "Oh, I've done 2 kind of LGBT stories today. I'm good for the month." Right? This happened, let's wait till next month. We'll slot it in somewhere. For example, I think that people's identities, people's lives, especially in a place like Nigeria, people's freedoms, right? People's ability to even have a family should not be a little niche that you have 2 articles just churned out and that's it. So I think that is the most important one. And Edwin has said this before, but it's so important, just the erasure. If you go by Nigerian media, you think that there are 2 gay people, maybe 1 lesbian, and then maybe 1 trans person in the whole of Nigeria, and that's it, the end, right? We exist, we are here, we take up space, we do good work, and yeah, you should write tweets, record audio, make videos about us. We are here, and then when you do, you should do it in a way that is ethical.
So I have there are 2 things I always advocate when I talk about journalism and media. I think the first thing I tell people is that, what is the composition of your newsroom? If your newsroom doesn't have diversity, there's no way it can project diversity. So especially, like, for example, where I worked at YNiger for 3 years, and in those 3 years we had all sorts of conversations about gender rights, feminism, misogyny, patriarchy, LGBT rights, LGBT issues, because I understood that this is all intersectional. Yes, if you don't treat women better, you will not treat trans people better, you will not treat gay people better. So essentially forcing these people to interrogate their beliefs and their biases in the newsroom, so that when they encounter a story, they have context. And if a journalist doesn't have context, there's no way that the journalist can bring context into someone else's story. So having a newsroom where everything is interrogated, where everything is questioned, nothing is put out without somebody coming, like, there should always be a voice of dissent in your newsroom that asks that questions. Are we doing the right thing? Have we done enough? Is this story accurate? Does this story represent the nuance that is this person's life. And I think the second thing I always advocate for is language.
Language.
The choice of words you use, how you choose to use those words. For example, it's a very, very small thing to people, but it's not when people say, oh, she was defiled, a child marriage. All those words tend to blunt the intensity of what is happening. And when you blunt the intensity, then people feel, oh, it's not really that big a deal. I don't have to act immediately, which is why people are saying, don't say reform SARS, say end SARS, because those words, as you propagate those words, they tend to blunt the meaning of what you want. And so we have to be accurate, especially when we're covering LGBT-related issues, to ensure that the language we are using is accurate to the situation, expresses the context of the situation. Otherwise, what we're going to have is people, by the time it gets to the audience loses the intensity of what is happening, and they don't have any call to action. They don't feel any urgency to act.
All right, thank you. I especially love the point about a diverse newsroom, because who better to tell LGBT plus stories than LGBT plus people themselves? So we know that journalism goes beyond mainstream journalists. We now have people popping up, we have bloggers, we have podcasters. These people they're spreading the message. They are the media in their own rights. How can we include them in the conversation of, advocating for LGBT plus community using their own spaces?
I would say the first thing is fund. We need to create more funds. We need to create more grants. We need to create opportunities for these people to access money, because as a freelance creator, it's expensive. And if you are concerned with where am I going to eat, what's my next, it becomes a lot harder to focus on the subject matter, the things you want to say. So I would say fund. And secondly, I would say support. There are a million ways to support. Retweet, repost, comment, like, share. Every time you amplify the work of a small creator who is focusing on LGBT-related issues, you essentially put a new voice into the space, and you diversify the conversation. So I would say do those two things. And thirdly, we need to advocate at a structural level for because it can't just be us. The government also has to create spaces for these conversations to be had, and those spaces have to be structurally protected. So, for example, in the NTA, do we have a diversity quota for LGBT people? At the parastatals, do we have a diversity quota for LGBT people? If we can advocate for those structural spaces to be created, for these stories to be heard, then a lot of independent creators will feel comfortable enough to actually enter into these spaces, explore, and tell these stories.
Stephanie, you've done something similar. I'm talking about using internet to sort of spread this news with Ubini. What are some of the hardest parts of spreading the gospel with that in your own space?
I'd say spreading it isn't the problem, because like I said, we do exist and there is a community. And so when you put out messaging like that, yes, there are trolls, but also when we're having events, for example, people show up and we have a nice time and it is safe. But I agree with what Edwin has said. I find that it's surface level. So there is way more to it than awareness. And he said this thing about structural change. And I think my focus more will be on persons who identify as LGBT plus or who are allies. We need to, as a matter of urgency, get into these spaces. And when I say spaces, I mean everything from governance to business to television to radio. And when you get into these spaces, do not become complacent, right? Do not become the oppressor.
Yeah.
Imagine if you're a producer on a documentary, you have creative license, you get to decide to some extent who works there, how the story is crafted, right? That is very important work, because it's a marathon. This thing we're talking about, it's not going to change in a year or two. So it's a subtle thing. You are basically shifting culture, the way that an entire people, if the census is to be believed, about 200 million people see an entire community in their country. The work that you do is very important. Do not take it lightly. you have an army of young upcoming journalists and storytellers who are looking up to you. So you have to chart the path, right? So do not become the head of some radio station and forget that you are queer, because we remember. So fight for us, right? Tell these stories, and then you will challenge and inspire the people who are coming to do the same. And then when you get into these spaces, right, pull up others, right? So when we, I don't want to use the word infiltrate, but when we get into these systems and create a network, it gets easier to do the work. So just pull up. I'm quoting Rihanna here. Pull up.
All right, thank you so much. What does an affirming media look like, and why is it important?
An affirming media to me is a space where we are treated, reported on, and documented as the full human beings that we are, with nuance, with context, with ethics, with respect. That's what it looks like. And if you ask what it means, it is the difference between life or death for queer kids everywhere in Nigeria.
An affirming media space to me is a space where we move away from journalists telling people stories to creating platforms where everybody can tell their own stories. Because there's this quote that says that there are no people who don't have a voice. There are just people who don't have a platform. So I want media in Nigeria to evolve to a point where essentially what we do is create a platform. We open spaces for people to be able to tell their stories, because the stories are never clean or sanitized.
Yes.
And as journalists, we have the temptation to sanitize stories. So by creating platforms, we should be able to fight that urge to sanitize, to improve, to English up the situation. And I think once that happens, it becomes a lot easier for these communities to advocate for themselves. Because I think that's part of the problem. They need journalists, they need media to advocate for themselves. But if there was a platform, the way Instagram, and Twitter, and Facebook has created these platforms, then it becomes a lot easier to advocate for yourself. It becomes a lot easier for them to not be branded as model citizens, as the only way that they can gain representation. And it's important for them to be flawed, the way everybody else is flawed. So once that happens, then young LGBT people, trans people can be messy and still have a platform. And that's the kind of future I want. I want a future where people are flawed and messy, but are able to tell their stories, are able to advocate for themselves, are able to shed light on issues that directly affect them. Kind of what is happening with NSAS right now. We are finally taking this platform. It's messy. We don't know who is the leader. We don't know who is the convener, but we are getting things done. And the LGBT community needs to have that kind of platform. Of course, it will take some time, but that's where we need to be eventually.
Thank you so much, Edwin. Thank you so much, SI Ohumu, for speaking with us today. It has been such an insightful conversation. The media is a conduit. Its message is as important as its structure, and we've gone beyond lending our silence to oppression. The new media can be all-inclusive and fair, and that fairness should be able to extend to the LGBT+ community. My name is Kiki Mordi. Thank you for watching.